These weapons were not just products of their time. They permanently reshaped how nations think about power, deterrence, and survival. The Soviet Union built systems that pushed warfare beyond conventional limits, introducing ideas that still influence military planning today: automated retaliation, mobile nuclear forces, space-based strike concepts, and weapons designed to overwhelm rather than compete. Western intelligence agencies feared these systems because they broke existing rules and rendered defenses obsolete overnight. Many of the doctrines, technologies, and strategic anxieties they created did not disappear. They became foundations of modern military thinking. Tsar Bomba, the most powerful nuclear weapon ever detonated. Tsar Bomba was the ultimate expression of nuclear power ever achieved by humanity, a weapon built not for battlefield use but for psychological dominance. Detonated by the Soviet Union in 1961, it remains the largest and most destructive nuclear device ever exploded, instantly redefining the upper limits of thermonuclear warfare and sending shockwaves through Western intelligence communities. Development of Tsar Bomba began in the late 1950s, during a period of intense nuclear competition between the superpowers. Soviet leadership sought a demonstration weapon that would leave no doubt about the USSR's technological capacity and willingness to escalate beyond any existing standard. The device was officially designated RDS-220, but its informal name reflected its intended status as the king of bombs. The weapon was a three-stage thermonuclear device, originally designed with a theoretical yield of up to 100 megatons. Soviet scientists, including Andrei Sakharov, ultimately reduced the yield to approximately 50 megatons to limit radioactive fallout and ensure the survival of the delivery aircraft. Even at half strength, Tsar Bomba was more than 3,000 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The test took place on October 30, 1961, over Novaya Zemlya in the Arctic. A modified Tu-95 bomber carried the weapon, which weighed approximately 27 metric tons and measured over 8 meters in length. A massive parachute slowed its descent, giving the aircraft time to escape. The explosion occurred at an altitude of about 4 kilometers above the ground. The effects were unprecedented. The fireball expanded to nearly 8 kilometers in diameter, briefly touching the ground below. The shockwave circled the Earth multiple times, and windows shattered hundreds of kilometers away. Observers reported that the flash was visible from more than 1,000 kilometers. The mushroom cloud rose to a height of approximately 60 kilometers, penetrating the upper atmosphere. For Western intelligence agencies, Tsar Bomba was terrifying not because it was militarily practical, but because of what it demonstrated. It proved that the Soviet Union could design, build, and deliver weapons far beyond any operational requirement. The message was clear: if the USSR chose restraint, it was by choice, not limitation. The test intensified global fears of uncontrollable nuclear escalation and contributed to renewed arms control efforts in the following years. It underscored the reality that thermonuclear war had moved beyond concepts of victory or survivability. Tsar Bomba was never deployed as a weapon system. Its true purpose was symbolic. It served as a blunt declaration of capability, signaling that the Soviet Union possessed the means to annihilate entire regions in a single detonation. As the most powerful nuclear weapon ever detonated, Tsar Bomba became the ultimate embodiment of Cold War excess, where fear itself was engineered as a strategic tool. R-36 Satan, ICBM, the missile designed to end cities in one strike. The R-36 intercontinental ballistic missile, known in NATO classification as Satan, was one of the most feared weapons of the Cold War and remains among the most destructive delivery systems ever deployed. Designed to guarantee the Soviet Union's ability to devastate an adversary in a single retaliatory blow, the R-36 embodied a doctrine built on overwhelming force rather than precision or restraint. Development of the R-36 began in the early 1960s at the Yuzhnoye Design Bureau under the leadership of Mikhail Yangel. Soviet planners were concerned that emerging U.S. missile defenses and hardened silos might blunt the effectiveness of earlier ICBMs. The response was to build a missile so powerful that interception or survival would be irrelevant. The R-36 was conceived as a weapon that could destroy the hardest targets and entire urban regions with ease. The missile first entered service in the late 1960s, with later variants such as the R-36M and R-36M2 deployed from the 1970s through the late Cold War. Standing over 34 meters tall and weighing more than 200 metric tons at launch, it was the largest and heaviest operational ICBM ever fielded. Its size allowed it to carry enormous payloads, including multiple independently targetable reentry vehicles, or MIRVs. At its peak, the R-36M2 variant could carry up to 10 high-yield nuclear warheads, each capable of destroying a major city, along with penetration aids designed to overwhelm missile defenses. Some configurations also included a single massive warhead with yields measured in the tens of megatons. This flexibility made the missile suitable for counterforce strikes against hardened military targets or counter-value strikes aimed at population centers. The R-36 was deployed in heavily reinforced underground silos, built to survive near-miss nuclear detonations. Its powerful engines allowed it to launch even if the surrounding area had been damaged by an initial strike, ensuring second strike capability. Western intelligence agencies viewed this survivability as deeply destabilizing, as it reduced confidence that any preemptive attack could neutralize Soviet nuclear forces. Accuracy improvements over time further increased its threat. Later models achieved circular error probabilities measured in hundreds of meters, making them capable of destroying hardened command centers and missile silos. This raised fears that the R-36 could be used not only in retaliation, but as part of a devastating first strike. The missile's psychological impact was immense. NATO's designation Satan reflected both its destructive potential and the dread it inspired among analysts. It symbolized a weapon built to remove any illusion of victory from nuclear war. Although many R-36 missiles were retired under arms reduction treaties in the 1990s and 2000s, the legacy of the system endures. It demonstrated that nuclear deterrence could be enforced through sheer excess, creating a weapon so powerful that its mere existence shaped global strategy. The R-36 was not designed to win wars, but to ensure that no war involving it could ever be survived. Dead hand system, perimeter, and automated nuclear retaliation machine. The dead hand system, officially designated perimeter, was one of the most disturbing and controversial weapons concepts ever developed by the Soviet Union. Unlike missiles, bombers, or submarines, perimeter was not designed to destroy targets directly. Its sole purpose was to guarantee that nuclear retaliation would occur even if the Soviet leadership, command centers, and communication networks had been completely eliminated in a surprise first strike. Development of perimeter began in the early 1970s, during a period when Soviet planners feared a decapitating nuclear attack by the United States. Advances in submarine-launched ballistic missiles, precision guidance, and early warning systems raised the possibility that Soviet political and military leadership could be destroyed before issuing a retaliatory order. Perimeter was created to remove that vulnerability by placing the final decision to retaliate beyond human survival itself. The system became operational in the early 1980s and functioned as an automated command and control network rather than a weapon platform. It was connected to a wide array of sensors monitoring seismic shock waves, radiation levels, atmospheric pressure changes, and communication traffic. Perimeter did not operate autonomously at all times. Human authorization was required to arm the system during periods of extreme crisis, ensuring that it could not activate accidentally under normal conditions. Once activated, perimeter continuously assessed whether a nuclear attack was underway. If it detected the physical signatures of nuclear detonations combined with the loss of communication with Soviet leadership, it initiated its final phase. Instead of launching nuclear warheads, Perimeter fired specialized command missiles. These missiles ascended over Soviet territory and transmitted encrypted launch orders to surviving nuclear forces, including missile silos, mobile launchers, bomber bases, and submarines at sea. What made Perimeter uniquely terrifying to Western intelligence agencies was its logic. It removed uncertainty from nuclear deterrence. A successful first strike would no longer prevent retaliation. It would guarantee it. This eliminated the strategic value of attacking leadership or command infrastructure, reinforcing the inevitability of mutual destruction. The system also carried enormous psychological weight. Even incomplete information about Perimeter forced NATO planners to assume worst-case scenarios. If the system functioned as intended, no technological advantage or surprise attack could disable Soviet nuclear response. Deterrence became mechanical rather than political, enforced by automated process rather than human judgment. Perimeter was not without safeguards. Multiple independent confirmations were required before action, and human operators retained control over activation. It was intended strictly as a last resort system, designed to function only in the most catastrophic circumstances imaginable. Dead Hand represented Cold War logic pushed to its extreme conclusion. It accepted that nuclear war could not be controlled, only guaranteed to end civilization for all participants. As an automated nuclear retaliation machine, Perimeter transformed deterrence into a system that would operate even when no one was left alive to give the order, making it one of the most unsettling superweapons ever conceived. Typhoon-class submarine, a nuclear fortress hidden beneath the ice. The Typhoon-class submarine was the most formidable undersea weapon system ever built, designed to ensure the absolute survivability of Soviet nuclear forces during the Cold War. More than a submarine, it was a submerged fortress, engineered to operate for months beneath the Arctic ice, far beyond the effective reach of Western detection and attack. Development of the Typhoon class began in the early 1970s under Project 941, as Soviet planners grew increasingly concerned about advances in NATO anti-submarine warfare. Improved sonar networks, patrol aircraft, and hunter-killer submarines threatened earlier ballistic missile submarines. The solution was radical. Build a vessel so large, resilient, and specialized that it could disappear into the Arctic environment itself. Construction took place at the Sevmash shipyard from the late 1970s through the mid-1980s. Each Typhoon measured approximately 175 meters in length and displaced more than 48,000 tons when submerged, making it the largest submarine ever constructed. To achieve this scale, designers adopted a unique multi-hull configuration with two parallel pressure hulls connected by additional compartments. This layout dramatically increased internal volume, buoyancy, and survivability in the event of damage. Power was provided by two nuclear reactors, granting virtually unlimited range and endurance. The Typhoon's primary mission was strategic deterrence, and its armament reflected this role. It carried up to 20 R-39 intercontinental ballistic missiles, each equipped with multiple nuclear warheads capable of striking targets thousands of kilometers away. These missiles were specifically designed to be launched through thick Arctic ice, allowing the submarine to remain concealed even during a launch sequence. Crew endurance was a critical design priority. Long patrols beneath the ice imposed severe psychological and physical strain, so the Typhoon included features rarely seen in military submarines. Crews had access to relatively spacious living quarters, a gymnasium, a sauna, and recreational areas. These amenities were not luxuries, but operational necessities, intended to maintain performance during patrols lasting several months. The Arctic environment itself became a strategic weapon. Operating under ice floes and polar darkness, the Typhoon exploited regions where Western sonar coverage was sparse and unreliable. NATO planners viewed the class as a major escalation in undersea warfare, forcing massive investment in new detection technologies, surveillance systems, and patrol strategies. Despite its power, the Typhoon was costly to maintain and operate. Arms reduction agreements, combined with economic pressures following the collapse of the Soviet Union, led to the gradual retirement of most vessels by the late 1990s to early 2000s. Only one was retained for testing and research. The Typhoon-class submarine embodied deterrence through scale, concealment, and inevitability. Hidden beneath the Arctic ice, it ensured that no first strike could ever neutralize Soviet nuclear forces, making it one of the most feared and consequential superweapons of the Cold War. Tu-160 Blackjack, the fastest and heaviest nuclear bomber ever built. The Tu-160 Blackjack was the most powerful and intimidating strategic bomber ever built, representing the Soviet Union's final and most advanced answer to Western long-range nuclear air power. Combining immense size, extreme speed, and heavy payload capacity, the Tu-160 was designed to penetrate enemy defenses and deliver nuclear weapons across intercontinental distances with devastating effect. Development of the Tu-160 began in the early 1970s as part of a Soviet effort to counter the US B-1 bomber program and modernize its aging bomber fleet. Soviet planners required an aircraft that could outrun interceptors, evade air defenses, and strike targets far beyond the reach of earlier bombers. The result was a massive, variable geometry aircraft optimized for speed, altitude, and endurance rather than stealth. The Tu-160 first flew in 1981 and entered operational service during the late 1980s. It remains the largest combat aircraft and the heaviest bomber ever to enter service. With a maximum takeoff weight exceeding 275 metric tons and a length of more than 54 meters, the Blackjack dwarfed nearly every other military aircraft of its era. Its variable sweep wings allowed it to optimize performance for long-range cruise or high-speed penetration. Powered by 4 Kuznetsov NK-32 afterburning turbofan engines, the Tu-160 was capable of sustained supersonic flight. It could exceed Mach 2 at altitude, making it the fastest strategic bomber ever built. This speed allowed it to reduce exposure time to enemy air defenses and complicated interception efforts, particularly when combined with long-range standoff weapons. The bomber's true strength lay in its payload and flexibility. The Tu-160 was designed to carry nuclear cruise missiles rather than gravity bombs, allowing it to strike targets without entering heavily defended airspace. Its internal weapon bays could carry up to 12 long-range nuclear cruise missiles, capable of striking targets thousands of kilometers away. This transformed the aircraft into a mobile launch platform rather than a traditional penetrator bomber. Range was another critical advantage. With aerial refueling, the Tu-160 could conduct global missions, reaching targets across North America, Europe, and Asia. This reach made it a central component of Soviet nuclear triad planning, complementing missiles and submarines with a visible, recallable deterrent. For Western intelligence agencies, the Tu-160 was deeply unsettling. Its speed, payload, and range suggested that air defenses alone could not reliably stop a coordinated bomber strike. Even if intercepted, the aircraft could launch its weapons from well beyond defensive coverage. Although produced in limited numbers, the Tu-160 symbolized Soviet aerospace ambition at its peak. It demonstrated that the USSR could build aircraft larger, faster, and more powerful than any bomber in the West. As the fastest and heaviest nuclear bomber ever built, the Tu-160 Blackjack embodied Cold War deterrence through scale, speed, and overwhelming striking power. Duga radar system, over-the-horizon early warning at continental scale. The Duga radar system was one of the most ambitious and unsettling surveillance weapons ever constructed by the Soviet Union, designed to provide early warning of intercontinental ballistic missile launches on a continental scale. At a time when minutes could determine survival, Duga represented an attempt to see beyond the curvature of the Earth itself and detect nuclear attack almost as soon as it began. Development of the Duga system started in the late 1960s, driven by Soviet fears that existing radar networks could not provide sufficient warning against submarine-launched or long-range ballistic missiles. Conventional line-of-sight radar was limited by the Earth's curvature, leaving gaps that Western forces could exploit. Duga was conceived as an over-the-horizon radar, using high-frequency radio waves reflected off the ionosphere to detect missile launches thousands of kilometers away. The most well-known Duga installation was built near Chernobyl in the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic and became operational from 1976 to 1989. A second major installation was constructed near Komsomolsk on Amur in the Russian Far East, providing coverage across the Pacific. The physical scale of these sites was staggering. The main antenna arrays stretched roughly 700 meters in length and rose over 150 meters high, towering above forests and surrounding infrastructure. To Western intelligence agencies and civilian radio operators alike, Duga quickly became infamous. It emitted a repetitive, rapid tapping signal across shortwave radio frequencies, earning the nickname the Russian woodpecker. The signal was so powerful that it disrupted civilian broadcasts, aviation communications, maritime traffic, and military transmissions worldwide. Its persistent presence made it impossible to ignore, and immediately raised suspicion that the USSR had deployed a new strategic surveillance system. Duga functioned as part of a broader early warning architecture. It was intended to provide several minutes of advance notice of missile launches before satellites or conventional radar systems could confirm an attack. In theory, this additional warning time could allow Soviet command authorities to assess the situation and initiate retaliation before incoming warheads arrived. Despite its ambition, the system suffered from serious limitations. Solar activity, ionospheric instability, and atmospheric noise frequently produced false alarms or degraded detection accuracy. These technical challenges limited reliability and strained confidence in the system's effectiveness. By the early 1980s, advances in satellite-based early warning systems began to outperform ground-based over-the-horizon radar, reducing Duga's strategic value. The Chernobyl disaster in 1986 sealed the fate of the Ukrainian installation. Following the evacuation of the exclusion zone, the Duga site was permanently shut down, and by 1989 the system was abandoned entirely. Duga terrified Western intelligence not because it worked perfectly, but because it demonstrated intent. It showed that the Soviet Union was willing to build enormous, experimental systems to gain even minutes of nuclear warning advantage. As an early warning network operating at continental scale, Duga embodied Cold War logic, where size, secrecy, and psychological pressure were weapons in their own right. Topol-M Mobile, ICBM, nuclear firepower that could not be found. The Topol-M Mobile intercontinental ballistic missile was one of the most destabilizing nuclear weapons ever fielded by the Soviet Union and later Russia, not because of raw explosive power, but because of its near impossibility to locate and destroy. Designed to survive any first strike, Topol-M transformed nuclear deterrence by turning concealment and mobility into primary weapons. Development of the Topol-M began in the late 1980s at the Moscow Institute of Thermal Technology as the Cold War neared its end. Soviet planners understood that fixed missile silos, no matter how hardened, were becoming increasingly vulnerable to precision-guided warheads and improved surveillance satellites. The solution was a missile system that could move constantly, blend into ordinary terrain, and deny the enemy reliable targeting data. Topol-M entered service during the late 1990s, becoming the first entirely Russian-designed ICBM deployed after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The missile itself was a solid-fueled, three-stage weapon capable of delivering a nuclear warhead across intercontinental distances with extreme accuracy. Its solid-fuel design allowed rapid launch with minimal preparation time, reducing vulnerability during alert status. What truly terrified Western intelligence agencies was the missile's mobile launcher. Mounted on a massive multi-axle transporter erector launcher, Topol-M units could disperse across forests, road networks, and remote regions, operating far from known bases. Launch crews followed constantly changing marshruting, often under camouflage nets or natural cover, making satellite tracking unreliable. At any given moment, dozens of potential launch locations existed, but only a few actually contained missiles. The launcher itself was engineered to resemble civilian heavy transport vehicles when viewed from a distance, further complicating identification. Decoys, dummy launchers, and false movement patterns were deliberately employed to overwhelm surveillance systems. Even with advanced reconnaissance assets, Western planners could never be confident they had located all deployed missiles. Topol-M was also designed to defeat missile defenses. Its warhead featured countermeasures such as penetration aids and maneuvering capability to complicate interception. Combined with unpredictable launch locations, this meant that even a sophisticated missile defense system could not guarantee neutralization of a Topol-M strike. Operational doctrine emphasized constant movement and readiness. Crews lived in the field for extended periods, supported by mobile command units and security forces. The system was designed to function even under nuclear attack, ensuring retaliation regardless of battlefield conditions. For NATO strategists, Topol-M removed the last illusion of controllable nuclear war. If missiles could not be found, they could not be destroyed. This forced Western planners to assume that any conflict would result in unavoidable retaliation. Topol-M represented a shift in nuclear strategy from overwhelming force to strategic invisibility. By turning mobility and concealment into decisive advantages, it ensured that nuclear firepower would always survive. As a weapon that could not be reliably located or preempted, Topol-M became one of the most feared elements of modern nuclear deterrence. AK-47, the rifle that changed global warfare forever. The AK-47 was not the largest or most technologically complex weapon developed by the Soviet Union, but it became one of the most influential and terrifying from a Western intelligence perspective. Its true power lay not in precision or sophistication, but in how completely it reshaped warfare across the globe. More than any other firearm, the AK-47 altered who could fight, how wars were sustained, and how long conflicts could last. The rifle was developed in the final years of World War II by Mikhail Kalashnikov, a wounded Red Army tank sergeant who sought to design a simple, reliable infantry weapon. Adopted by the Soviet military in 1947, the Avtomat Kalashnikova quickly became the standard service rifle of the USSR. Its design philosophy was radically different from many Western weapons, prioritizing ruggedness, ease of manufacture, and functionality under extreme conditions. The AK-47 used a gas-operated system with generous internal tolerances, allowing it to function reliably despite dirt, sand, mud, snow, and minimal maintenance. It fired the intermediate 7.62 by 39 mm cartridge, which balanced controllable automatic fire with effective range and stopping power. While not exceptionally accurate, the rifle was deadly enough at typical combat distances and nearly impossible to disable through neglect or environmental exposure. What alarmed Western intelligence agencies was not the rifle's battlefield performance alone, but its strategic proliferation. The Soviet Union deliberately exported the AK-47 and licensed its production across Eastern Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Factories capable of producing millions of rifles were established in Allied states, turning the weapon into a symbol of Soviet influence and ideological reach. The simplicity of the design meant that untrained fighters could learn to use it quickly, and poorly equipped forces could sustain long conflicts without sophisticated logistics. Insurgent groups, revolutionary movements, and proxy forces armed with AK-47s could challenge technologically superior armies through sheer numbers and persistence. This dramatically altered the balance of power in post-colonial conflicts and Cold War proxy wars. From Vietnam to Afghanistan, Western forces encountered opponents equipped with weapons that functioned reliably in environments that defeated more delicate firearms. The AK-47's durability reduced the effectiveness of supply interdiction, as ammunition and spare parts were widely available and interchangeable. Even captured rifles could be immediately reused. The rifle also carried immense psychological weight. Its silhouette became synonymous with revolution, resistance, and asymmetric warfare. Intelligence assessments increasingly recognized that the AK-47 was not merely a weapon, but a force multiplier that prolonged conflicts and destabilized entire regions. The AK-47 changed warfare by lowering the barrier to sustained armed conflict. It allowed mass participation in violence on a global scale, transforming small arms into instruments of geopolitical influence. As the rifle that armed millions and outlasted ideologies, the AK-47 permanently altered how wars were fought and why they were so difficult to end. Shkval supercavitating torpedo, underwater speed beyond interception. The Shkval supercavitating torpedo was one of the most shocking naval weapons ever revealed by the Soviet Union, not because of its stealth, but because it abandoned stealth entirely in favor of overwhelming speed. Designed to outrun any known countermeasure, Shkval rewrote the rules of underwater combat and forced Western navies to confront a threat they were technologically unprepared to stop. Development of Shkval began during the 1960s at Soviet research institutes specializing in naval weapons. At the time, conventional torpedoes relied on relatively slow speeds and acoustic homing, making them vulnerable to decoys, evasive maneuvers, and counter-torpedo tactics. Soviet engineers instead pursued a radical concept: supercavitation. Rather than moving through water, Shkval would travel inside a gas bubble, dramatically reducing drag and allowing unprecedented velocity. Shkval entered service in the 1970s as a rocket-propelled torpedo capable of reaching speeds exceeding 200 knots, several times faster than any conventional torpedo. At such velocity, reaction time for a targeted submarine or surface vessel was reduced to seconds. Evasion was effectively impossible once the weapon was launched within range. The torpedo achieved supercavitation by ejecting gas from its nose, forming a continuous bubble that enveloped the weapon. Small control surfaces and gyroscopic stabilization allowed limited steering within the cavity. Because conventional sonar guidance could not function at such speeds, early Shkval variants followed a straight-line trajectory toward the target area, rather than homing precisely on a moving ship. To compensate for reduced accuracy, Shkval was originally designed to carry a nuclear warhead. Detonation within the general vicinity of an enemy submarine formation or carrier group would guarantee destruction regardless of precise targeting. This design choice reflected Soviet doctrine, which prioritized decisive outcomes over tactical refinement in high-intensity naval combat. Western intelligence agencies were deeply alarmed when details of Shkval became known in the late Cold War and early post-Soviet period. Existing anti-torpedo defenses, sonar warning systems, and evasive tactics were rendered largely irrelevant. The weapon's speed meant that detection often occurred too late for any meaningful response. Shkval also had significant limitations. Its range was relatively short, noise levels were extreme, and maneuverability was limited. These factors made it unsuitable for traditional stealth-based submarine warfare. However, its role was never subtle. Shkval was conceived as a last-ditch or first-strike weapon, intended to break enemy formations or ensure mutual destruction in a naval engagement. The psychological impact of Shkval was as important as its technical performance. It demonstrated that the Soviet Union was willing to discard established paradigms and pursue extreme solutions that rendered existing Western doctrines obsolete overnight. Shkval forced navies to rethink underwater warfare from first principles. By achieving underwater speed beyond interception, it proved that dominance at sea could be redefined not by concealment, but by raw, unstoppable velocity. S-300 Air Defense System, the shield that challenged Western air power. The S-300 air defense system was one of the most consequential and intimidating weapons developed by the Soviet Union, fundamentally challenging Western assumptions about air superiority. Designed to defend vast areas against aircraft, cruise missiles, and ballistic threats, the S-300 transformed air defense from a static, localized function into a mobile, layered shield capable of denying airspace to even the most advanced attackers. Development of the S-300 began in the late 1960s, driven by Soviet concerns over NATO's growing reliance on air power, precision-guided munitions, and strategic bombers. Western doctrine increasingly assumed that air superiority could be achieved early in a conflict, enabling deep strikes against command centers and infrastructure. The S-300 was conceived to break that assumption by creating zones where aircraft could not operate without unacceptable losses. The system entered service in the late 1970s and evolved through multiple variants over the following decades. Unlike earlier air defense systems, the S-300 was highly mobile. Mounted on wheeled or tracked launchers, radar vehicles, and command units, it could be rapidly deployed, repositioned, and concealed. This mobility made preemptive destruction extremely difficult and ensured survivability even under sustained attack. Technically, the S-300 was far ahead of many contemporaries. It employed powerful phased-array radars capable of tracking dozens of targets simultaneously at long range. The system could engage multiple aircraft at once, guiding missiles with high accuracy against fast, low-flying, or high-altitude targets. Later versions expanded capability to intercept ballistic missiles, blurring the line between air defense and missile defense. What most alarmed Western intelligence agencies was the system's integration. The S-300 was designed to operate as part of a broader, networked defense architecture, sharing data with other radars and surface-to-air systems. This created overlapping engagement zones that reduced the effectiveness of jamming, decoys, and saturation attacks. Aircraft penetrating defended airspace faced continuous tracking rather than isolated threats. The S-300 also forced changes in Western aircraft design and tactics. High-altitude bombers became more vulnerable, while low-level penetration exposed aircraft to short-range defenses. Stealth technology, electronic warfare, and standoff weapons gained urgency partly because of systems like the S-300. NATO planners increasingly recognized that future conflicts would involve contested airspace rather than uncontested dominance. Export of the S-300 amplified its impact. Deployed beyond the Soviet Union, it threatened Western aircraft far from Europe and complicated intervention planning. Even the possibility of its presence could deter air operations or require extensive suppression campaigns. The S-300 was not invincible. It required skilled crews, coordination, and protection from ground attack. However, its existence changed the strategic equation. It proved that air power could be challenged systematically and at scale. As a shield designed to deny airspace rather than merely defend points, the S-300 forced the West to rethink the cost of air operations. It stood as a clear message that Soviet air defenses were no longer obstacles to be bypassed, but barriers capable of reshaping modern warfare itself. FOBS, Fractional Orbital Bombardment System, Nuclear Attack from Space. The Fractional Orbital Bombardment System, known as FOBS, was one of the most radical and unsettling nuclear weapons concepts ever deployed by the Soviet Union. Designed to deliver nuclear warheads from space rather than along predictable ballistic paths, FOBS directly challenged the foundations of Western early warning systems and strategic defense planning. Development of FOBS began in the early 1960s as Soviet engineers searched for ways to bypass U.S. missile detection networks. At the time, American early warning radars were primarily oriented toward the Northern Hemisphere, optimized to detect intercontinental ballistic missiles traveling over the North Pole. Soviet planners identified a critical vulnerability: an attack originating from space and approaching from unexpected directions, particularly the south, could evade detection until it was too late to respond. FOBS worked by placing a nuclear warhead into a low Earth orbit using a modified ICBM. Unlike conventional orbital weapons, the system did not complete a full orbit. Instead, the warhead was deorbited partway around the Earth, allowing it to strike its target from an unpredictable trajectory. This fractional orbit meant the weapon could approach from virtually any direction. rendering fixed radar coverage largely ineffective. The system entered limited operational service in the late 1960s with the R-360 missile variant. Although the payload typically consisted of a single nuclear warhead rather than multiple MIRVs, the strategic advantage lay in surprise rather than volume. Western intelligence agencies were alarmed by the possibility that a nuclear strike could occur with little or no warning, undermining the stability of deterrence based on detection and response time. FOBS also carried profound political implications. By weaponizing orbit, the system blurred the line between space exploration and space warfare. Its existence directly contradicted the spirit, though not the explicit wording, of emerging international agreements aimed at keeping nuclear weapons out of space. This ambiguity complicated arms control negotiations and fueled fears of an escalating space-based arms race. Despite its disruptive potential, FOBS had limitations. Accuracy was lower than that of traditional ICBMs, and the system was expensive and complex to operate. Advances in satellite-based early warning systems gradually reduced its advantage as global surveillance coverage improved. Additionally, the Outer Space Treaty of 1967 and later arms control agreements increased political pressure against such weapons. By the early 1980s, the Soviet Union began withdrawing FOBS from service, and the system was formally abandoned under subsequent treaties. Even so, its impact endured far beyond its operational life. FOBS terrified Western intelligence, not because it was widely deployed, but because it exposed a fundamental weakness in strategic defense assumptions. It demonstrated that nuclear attack could come not just over borders or oceans, but from space itself. As a weapon designed to exploit surprise on a planetary scale, the fractional orbital bombardment system remains one of the most extreme examples of Cold War innovation, driven by fear, secrecy, and the pursuit of strategic advantage. Energia Buran System. Strategic space power with military potential. The Energia Buran system was the most ambitious and strategically significant space weapons platform ever developed by the Soviet Union, combining a super heavy launch vehicle with a reusable orbital spacecraft. Far more than a response to the American space shuttle, the system represented a bid for strategic dominance in space, with clear military implications that deeply unsettled Western intelligence agencies. Development began in 1976, driven by Soviet fears that the U.S. space shuttle could be used for military missions such as deploying weapons, retrieving satellites, or conducting orbital strikes. Rather than build a direct copy, Soviet engineers pursued a more flexible and powerful architecture. The result was a two-part system: the Energia heavy-lift rocket and the Buran space shuttle, each capable of operating independently or together. Energia was the core of the system. Standing over 58 meters tall, it was capable of lifting more than 100 metric tons into low Earth orbit, placing it among the most powerful rockets ever built. Unlike the American shuttle stack, Energia was designed as a universal booster. It could launch Buran, massive space station modules, experimental military payloads, or large spacecraft mounted directly on its core. This flexibility suggested missions far beyond civilian spaceflight. Buran itself was outwardly similar to the U.S. space shuttle, but differed fundamentally in capability. It lacked main engines, relying entirely on Energia for launch, which freed internal volume for payload. Buran could fly fully autonomously, without a crew, a feature demonstrated during its only mission on November 15, 1988. This capability raised Western concerns about potential unmanned military operations in orbit, including satellite interception or rapid response missions. The military potential of the Energia Buran system was its most alarming aspect. Energia's payload capacity could have supported deployment of large reconnaissance platforms, space-based weapons, or anti-satellite systems in a single launch. Buran's cross-range capability and precision landing suggested possible roles in satellite recovery, orbital inspection, or even kinetic strike concepts that were never publicly disclosed. The scale of the program was enormous. Hundreds of factories and research institutes were involved, and entire launch complexes at Baikonur were constructed specifically to support Energia. The RD-170 engine family developed for the rocket became some of the most powerful liquid-fueled engines ever built, reinforcing perceptions that the USSR was preparing for long-term space competition. Despite its success, the system flew only once. Economic collapse, shifting priorities, and the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 ended the program. Hardware was placed in storage, and remaining orbiters were never completed. The Energia Buran system terrified Western intelligence not because it was operationally deployed, but because of what it made possible. It demonstrated that the Soviet Union possessed the technological and industrial capacity to project power into space at an unprecedented scale. As a platform with clear military potential, it represented a future where space itself could become a decisive battlefield.